Karen has just reminded us a few moments ago that everyone is welcome at the table. And when Jesus instituted the Last Supper on the night he was betrayed, you can picture that ragtag group of riffraff that were gathered in the upper room. Each of them had come to Jesus with hopes and dreams. Each of them had come to discipleship with certain expectations about the kind of fruit that Jesus' commitment to them and their commitment to Jesus would yield. For most, if not all, those expected outcomes of discipleship were not all that distinguishable from worldly success. An earthly kingdom, positions of power, and a bit of power to wield on the side. But that night in the upper room, Jesus began to make it clear that while God was busy doing something very profound, God's outcomes were not going to line up with their hoped-for expectations. You see, suffering wasn't on their agenda. Dying wasn't in their ministry plan written on Form A. Those weren't the outcomes they expected, for they were, like us, seeking indicators and evidence of success. Although all that God was doing was hidden from the disciples, they may have felt like things were going to hell in a handbasket or falling to pieces. But God was at work in profound, life-altering, world-transforming ways. They just couldn't see it yet. What was about to happen to Jesus and through his death on the cross and his resurrection would ultimately turn their lives and their ways of seeing and living upside down. For where God reigns, those who have no money can come to the table and buy food. Where God reigns, the powerful bend down to serve. Where God reigns, suffering and death are not the end, but the pathway to life. Can you imagine? No wonder, with the expectations they brought, that when they came to that night and then to the days that followed, crisis of faith ensued. The disciples must have wondered exactly what it was that God was doing because they couldn't see it. The night was dark and God's work was hidden from their eyes. About a year ago now, after a charge conference, I had the privilege of having a heartfelt conversation in the parking lot with a pastor that I greatly respect. This person is a wise, effective, seasoned pastor serving one of our small membership churches in retirement. He's had an excellent ministry, even winning conference awards in his conference for evangelism. But for the first time in his ministry that year, this pastor had seen worship attendance decline and every outreach attempt he tried fail. In the quietness of our conversation, literally over a Prius, this man confessed to me. He said, "Jill, when I was first appointed over 50 years ago, we simply did ministry well and people showed up." He said, "It's a different day. And to be honest, I'm very glad I'm not a young pastor just starting out today." Well, I thought about our conversation as I drove home that evening, and I've, to be honest, been ruminating on it a lot ever since. Reflecting on the course of ministry and how things have changed, this pastor poignantly describes what so many of us know in the core of our being. And that's essentially that the old ways no longer bring the results they used to, and the new ways have yet to fully emerge. Elaine Heath, United Methodist scholar, author, and professor of evangelism at Perkins School of Theology, whose birthday was yesterday. I only know that because of Facebook. But Elaine describes it this way. She says, "We look around, stunned and grief-stricken at our impotence. It's as if all the familiar religious furniture was packed into a great moving van and carried to a far country. But none of it fits in the new house, and the old house has been torn down, and we are now foreigners living in a land we do not know. And after a while," she says, "we all sit down, exhausted from our efforts and thinking about calling it quits. We keep asking ourselves why nothing works anymore. We lose the desire to try, and the unutterable weariness initiates for some people, both clergy and lay, a disillusioned exodus from the church. I read Elaine Heath's first chapter of her book, The Mystic Way of Evangelism, right after my charge conference conversation, and found it to be a source of great comfort. Heath speaks to church leaders, particularly, who are ridden with anxiety about the church's future. But unlike the foreboding tone of many who are writing today, who warn about the coming demise of the church if those who lead the church, that's us folks, fail to get our collective act together, Heath asserts that a dark night of the soul is descending on the church in the United States. There are, she says, signs of this dark night all around us. It includes a steady decline in church attendance, a striking increase in the percentage of Americans who do not see church as relevant, dropping numbers of young adults preparing for ordained ministry, as well as many other signs, and I'm sure we could create the list. Heath claims rightly that many Christians view the decline of Western Christendom with alarm, as if God had fallen from heaven. But then she talks about our response to that reality, and she describes it this way. See if it sounds familiar. She says, enormous effort is put forth to launch church growth programs to shore up membership, increase giving, and keep denominational boats afloat. Fear and anxiety are daily companions as we frenetically grab at every new church growth program and strategy that promises to bring new life and keep death at bay. Anxious, enormous effort is not the answer. For by simply trying to do what we've always done, only faster and harder, and reporting the efforts, we somehow think we can expect different results. And friends, that's the definition of insanity. But Heath tells us that thanks be to God, there is another way to respond. One of the main problems with our response to the dark night of the soul is that we're frantically trying to push the darkness away without discerning and embracing the gifts that the darkness brings. In the darkness, she says, we surrender the illusion that we're in control. In times of darkness, we cling to only that which is essential. The dark night of the soul is a time for profound trust in God, a God who is at work even when we do not see evidence of it. And it's a time, the dark night of the soul is a time to let go of all unhealthy attachments so that our hands might be free to receive the new thing that God is doing. Well-known psychologist Gerald May notes, sometimes this letting go of old ways is painful, occasionally even devastating, but that's not why the night is called dark. The darkness of the night implies nothing sinister, only that liberation is taking place in hidden ways beneath our knowledge and understanding. And so Heath reminds us, the dark night is here, even now. And when the sun sets on Christendom in the West, the saints, the mystics, and the martyrs beckon to the church as a great cloud of witnesses, calling us to transformation. She says the church will persevere through the night and emerge on the other side, not because of our ingenuity or because of church programs, but because God's love has kept it. So why talk about the dark night of the soul today? Well, because I believe that when we work ourselves into an anxious frenzy because of the ongoing decline of the institutional church, it rarely leads to anything productive. Blaming, anger, frustration, and feelings of helplessness rule the day. The season we know as the dark night of the soul calls us to something very different. It invites us to listen deeply to God, to listen deeply to one another, and to listen deeply to the world in which we are engaged so that we might discern what God is up to and then participate in God's mission. Today, although it is light outside, we gather at the table to minister to one another and to receive ministry, and hopefully to reframe our thinking about what is happening in the church that we love and serve. Yes, we are in decline, and we have been for more than 40 years. The reason for the church's decline are legion and they are complex. And no one is to blame. Ministry in this changing context requires creative, innovative responses discerned in community. And ministry in this changing context is difficult, and no one is an expert on how to do it. So what do? Well, at least for today, let's try living counterculturally. How about we embrace the darkness that has descended around us? What if we let it remind us that God is at work? That God may be, in fact, working in ways that we do not expect, in hidden ways and in unseen ways, but God is at work. Even in the United Methodist Church, even in your congregation, even in you, and even in me. When we know this to be true in the depths of our being, we can let go of anything artificial that we cling to in order to ensure our survival. And we can open our hands to receive the gifts that God so wants to give us and through us to the world. So as we gather in this upper room today and experience the dark night of the soul that currently covers the church, please listen intently, breathe deeply, and relax into a profound sense of trust that when God is at work, the result is always something good. Amen.